Hello, everyone. Jimmy here for Veganic Growers Hour number 16. Can you believe it? I'm not sure I can. it's it's really coming down to the end of the year, isn't it? The end of the season. Here in Boileau, Quebec, it is. I'll say hello to a couple people. Hello, Anne. Here in Boileau, Quebec, it is 13 degrees, 55 Fahrenheit, and it is dropping fast. They are forecasting for it to maybe get close to a freeze tonight. We're hoping not, but we're prepared either way. So we've been busy processing. We've been processing tomatoes, Mexican-style salsa. We've been canning. We've been drying ground cherries, Melanie. Tomorrow is going to be cutting and freezing sweet corn and some last of the season cherry tomatoes. So we're squirreling away our stores for the winter time. It's always fun to do that. We are gleaning the half-ripe tomatoes. We don't want them to freeze out there. And also they get a little mealy if it gets too cold. Hot peppers, eggplants, sweet peppers, and go down pretty much every night checking for the ripe melons that are starting to all ripen, which is really nice because melons can be long, and this year they weren't. But before we start, I had an interesting idea, so I'm going to take you all on a meditative walk. So every evening, the nightly ritual around here is to close the greenhouse and the caterpillar tunnels down below. And we do this because it gets so humid at night that the humidity gets into the tomato plants and give them all sorts of diseases. And by closing the sides of the plastic-covered caterpillar tunnels, it just blocks that extra humidity from coming in and keeps them surviving longer. So every night we take a walk. So I'm going to take you on a meditative walk. I may close my eyes and you may be as well. And I want to say hello to Catherine from Quebec. Cold day here, a taste of autumn. Yeah, that's what it felt like over here in the West also, Catherine. It felt quite like a day of fall. So here we go. So I leave the greenhouse and I'm walking down our slope, and we live in a glacial valley, so surrounding us is mountains. And I pass a stoic wild apple tree that kind of sits right in the middle of a path that leads down to the gardens. And as I continue to descend down the gardens, I look off to the right, and there is our pond that's almost full. And we're so blessed that we did get the rains, and that we're going to start next spring with a full pond, which is always a wonderful benefit. So I walk into the nylon gate and I walk into the gardens, and I look to my left, and there's the last of the echinacea blooms, and the vining grapes have morning glory flowers that are lifting on them, and kind of turned the other way are some really gorgeous red sunflowers. But on the way back, I'll talk about that. So as I'm walking down, I'm passing through the old potato patch, which we harvested all the first week of August and planted buckwheat, and the buckwheat is all up and flowering beautifully after only 6 weeks. And I had noticed today earlier that there was some wild amaranth that was going to seed, and it can be quite pervasive in the spring. So I wanted to pull some of the bigger ones and put it over into the hedgerow. And as I was pulling them, I went to grip one, and I looked down, and there is this beautiful blue iridescent dragonfly that's clinging to the stem. And there's just that moment of comprehension between him and I that this is his place to sleep for tonight. It's going to get cold. Please don't pull my home for tonight. So I don't. So I leave it. So I'm walking on through, and I walk across one of our green strips that are just lush with perennial clover, into the brassica patch, which is all completely over. We harvested all the last of our cabbages yesterday. There's just one 15-foot patch of Brussels sprouts that are still there. But where the plants are decaying, there's a beautiful undersowing, which will come into tonight's show, an undersowing of crimson clover that is just taking over, and it's flowering. And the last of the sunset bumblebees were foraging some nectar before the cold night set in. So I walk on down and I walk to the tunnels, and I'm closing the tunnels. And as I do, I peer into the half-ripe sweet peppers that I'm going to have to glean here pretty soon. But we're just waiting a little bit longer, hoping that they get full red, get that full sweetness. And I turn the corner and I close the other side, and I take a look at the melons, who I've been looking at every night, hoping that the Charente melons were going to ripen here soon. We have more rain forecasted Saturday, and they don't taste the same after the rain. So I look, and sure enough, there is one that's about a kilo. Beautiful Charente melon that I know is going to be wonderful for our breakfast tomorrow morning. And so I go to the other side and I close up, and as I do, the sun is just setting over the western cliffs, and the light that pulsates off the mountains is just that glorious orange hue, a little bit of pink on the clouds. And as I walk on back, I walk on through the squash plants and the zucchini plants that have fallen, that are completely done, and the holy basil that keeps us in fresh nighttime tea every night, sacred basil that we drink every evening. We're so thankful that we had such a wonderful patch again this year, and we dry it also so we can drink it all fall and winter. And I'm looking at the sunflowers, and I hear bees, but I don't see them. And the sunflowers are starting to lose their pollen, and the seeds are inside, and we're going to collect those heads soon so we can sell off some of those seeds to our seed customers next spring. And as I round up back towards coming back up the hill, and I pass by the red sunflowers, I do notice one. I notice a rusty tricolored bumblebee that is moving really slow in the pollen, just getting her nighttime feed before she goes to bed. And this is pretty much my nightly ritual. This is, for me, this is what it's been all about. It's been 18 years now that I've been a professional farmer. I haven't had to have any other kind of big job. And I've been blessed to be able to take these walks to look outside, to breathe the air. It was first in Arizona, where it was quite a different climate than here in Quebec. And but now here I am in this beautiful paradise, which is absolutely the most beautiful place I've ever lived. So I hope you enjoyed your walk. If you closed your eyes, maybe you got a sense of it. And if you didn't, I hope you enjoyed it. So welcome, Margaret, Saskatchewan. Wow, 17 degrees. That's balmy over there. Hope things are well with your gardens over there in I think it's in Watson, if I'm not mistaken. So on with tonight's show. We are going to be talking about in-bed composting, seeding winter edible and cover crops, and putting the gardens to bed. So let's get going. Hey, Shannon from Portland, Oregon. Welcome. And I think it's the first time on the show, so welcome. So in-bed composting, let me make a note on time. There are many different ways. There are many different ideas to think about in-bed composting. You can look at it really any way you want. As we were taking the meditative walk, I was telling you that we were passing by buckwheat plantings. Now, when we first got here and we first started growing here in 2015, we tried planting buckwheat, but the soil was so infertile. It was so, actually, it wasn't that it was infertile, but the pH was so low that we just couldn't get the buckwheat to grow very well. So we came up with an idea. Where we would put some compost down, grow the buckwheat in the compost, cut the buckwheat down, and then put about 4 wheelbarrows worth of compost over 125 square feet. So it's quite a lot of compost to build up the soil and to also break down that buckwheat that we had cut down with walking scissors. And then the next thing you know, the buckwheat grew back up. And so just before the end of the season, just before the freeze, I went ahead and cut it down again. was quite arduous, but it did create some really beautiful soils here at a time when we really needed to build up that soil. But in a lot of ways, it's almost too much. It's almost too much to do. In-bed composting can be as simple as letting all your plants just decompose on your beds at the end of the season. So here in Quebec, we're lucky because when the rains come and the plants start dying off, there's definitely a time the freeze comes and they're going to freeze the plants back. And there's going to be some stuff that continues to grow, some kale, some greens, some of the brassicas are going to keep going that hadn't already finished. But for the most part, everything's going to die down and they're just going to die kind of in the paths and on the beds. Well, this is just a perfect example of letting everything just compost right in place. After that, the rains come and the rains go ahead and start decomposing it more. And then the snows come and leave a nice snow layer on the top, like I'm sure you have in Saskatchewan, and I'm not so sure you have in Portland, but maybe you get a little bit of snow there. But either way, if you have in your beds, you go ahead and have those plants that are just going to go ahead and sit on top of the beds. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to create not only a home, sometimes, so not only a home for all of the soil microorganisms that really are going to continue to feed, especially in the spring, you really see it. But from what I've learned about microorganisms in the soil, they're constantly changing. So there are spring microorganisms that are working, and then those die off to become summer microorganisms that start working, and then fall microorganisms, and then the ones that are more cold hardy, depending on where you live. Everything's related to your soil temperatures. But if you give all that soil a nice warm place, and it'll be warmer with more that's on top. There are people out there that say you can go ahead and put mulch on top, you can put leaves on top. And yes, you can do all that. You can put dry leaves, you can go ahead and shred leaves, you can put dry straw, you can put dry hay, you can put green hay, you can put green grass. It really doesn't matter. All of that is going to allow the soil microorganisms time and food to let them feed for as long as their cycle exists. I really love this idea of in-bed composting. To me, it is an incredible thing to witness, where you have those huge brassica stems, especially green cabbage. You've got the stem that is like that big, and these monster leaves that just don't look like they would break down. If you put them in the compost pile, it seems like every year you still have those huge, we call them trognones, but those huge stems of cabbage that are maybe not even close to broken down. Well, what I noticed is that here, yes, in the spring, we still have to take out those big trunnions, those big stems of cabbages, but they're hollowed out. Someone has been in there eating out some of the insides. We used to actually pull all the plants out of the ground and then leave the plants on the bed. Kind of a lot of work to do that because the root systems are quite huge. Now we don't do that anymore. What we find is that when we go to pull off the stem in the spring, say in early April, there's almost no large roots left. Those are all cut off by whoever was living in the soil. And now I'm talking about shrews and I know them as taupes. Hold on, campignons. So field mice and shrews, moles will do the same. They're all going to burrow in there, and then they're all going to take some of that fibrous material to either eat or make their nest with. So when we're in-bed composting, this is not just about helping humans create better soil for human food, but it's also creating that much needed space for all of those creatures who lived out their entire lives there. They might even be working for us that we don't even know. All those ground beetles and those mice, and they say, oh, all those mice that eat our seedlings. It's like, yeah, but they do so much more than that. You know, they're eating the root and seedlings of maybe competing crops. they've been accustomed, and they are indigenous, and they grew up with native flora. So my guess is they're eating as much native flora as they are eating our seedlings. And for my benefit, for my part, in the last 7 years of growing here, it's only been once that we've actually had the champignons, or kind of the, I guess those would be shrews, come and eat our baby seedlings. And it was only because we happened to put our plantation, our small plantation of brassicas, and when I say plantation, I'm talking 6 rows, 625-foot rows of late season broccoli and cauliflower right on top of a family that we didn't know was living there. So whose fault is that? It's not the shrews, it's our fault. Anyway, so in bed composting. So any way that you look at it, it really doesn't matter. The point is at the end of the season, when we're all thinking about, okay, all of our plants are dying, they're dead, we want to clean everything up, because as humans, we have this incessant need to, keep everything clean, and we want to have it nice and pretty with just soil. No, stop. Don't do that. Do not clear out your gardens. Does not matter. Leave it all in place. It doesn't matter how much native flora, some people call them weeds, how much native flora in your beds. Doesn't matter how much disease is supposedly on your plants. Leave it all there. Agronomes must be freaking out right now. They're just turning around in their office chairs at their universities. No, what are you saying? Disease, you got to take it out. You got to burn it. Otherwise, you can continue to have disease. No. There's actually studies out there that prove that if you do keep those plants in that have certain diseases at the end of the season, it will then create generational resistance. Now, it's true that a lot of the plants that we grow are annual plants, but it doesn't matter, because the same soil microorganisms, even if we rotate every few years, are going to remember that you grow certain annual plants even 4 or 5 years later. And what's going to happen is that all of that disease that was there, because some of those diseases, say powdery mildew, might affect 2 or 3 different families that you might plant in the same place, or white mold, which is another one that we have that affects physalis crops like your dry beans, as well as tomato and all your other solanaceae like peppers and eggplants. So if you have that in your soil, the plants are going to recognize it. The microorganisms are going to recognize it, and those two working, and the mycorrhizae are going to recognize it. And so what ends up happening as we begin to understand what the living soil is doing is that the mycorrhizae and the root systems and the microorganisms are all going to work together to find a way to get your plants to thrive. Because nothing within these organisms wants to see a plant not go to fruition. Microorganisms, mycorrhizae, they all need the plant to go to flower and to seed and to propagate, or to develop a well-sustaining root system so that it can continue on. Otherwise, these beings don't exist. So they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that all of these plants thrive. Even if there was an extensive amount of white mold, which you can read about, which is really, really notorious and really, really awful to deal with. But if you just let your plants decompose there, it's going to know. The soil is going to know. And this is what we've noticed, because there was, first year it came in, I was like, oh no, because we grow all of our own dry beans. And we let all of that wonderful organic material, compost, right onto the beds. And in the spring, it's so, the leaves of the plant and the stems of the plant are so thin that there's almost nothing left. And even when there is something left, we just rake it up and we use it as straw to go underneath all of our cucurbit plantings. But that first year, I freaked out when I realized what it was. I'd never seen it before. I think that was in 2017, after a really, really wet year. But what I realized really fast, because we were saving seed and it was all of our dry beans that we eat, what I realized is that there were some plants that had it and some plants that didn't. They're all like right next to each other. So here's one plant that had it and here's one plant that didn't. It doesn't make sense. If it's so pervasive and you need to pull everything out and you need to burn all your plants, well, why would one plant have it, one plant not? Well, it's because one plant developed a quick resistance to it. It's there. It's there in the soil. It's there because of really high levels of humidity and kind of a warmish temperature. It was all possible. All those beans were possible to get it. They didn't. And what I realized really quickly was, yes, it's a problem, but what is there one can do about it except leave everything there? So every year we still get it. It still comes in. Mostly it comes in because the temperatures are way too wet at the end of the season. Probably we don't have the most well draining of soils either. We've never ran sort of a harrow plow way deep into the subsurface of the soil to really break things up so that the water drains really well. No, the water pretty much stays where it's at. I have fields this year that are still wet on the surface, but yet plants still grow. Sometimes it's the volunteers that do even better. So anyway, I'm going off track, but the point is let it all there. It doesn't matter what a disease has. And if you don't trust this philosophy, look out into the forest, take a walk into the forest at the coming of fall and tell me what you see. All of the leaves of the elm trees, of the maple trees here in Quebec, they all have a leaf spot. They all have a bacterial leaf spot. They're all getting diseased. All the undergrowth plants, they all have a disease. Guess what? Every year they come back. Every year there's leaves. So don't trust me, trust what you see, but what you can believe, and this is actually a scientific study, and this is new research from 2020 that we're starting to understand a lot more now about living soils in the scientific community. Leave all the plants there, doesn't matter what. So this is my easiest method of in-bed composting. I do really, really like the idea of using dry leaves. I think dry leaves are super beneficial for a garden. Here, I can't make leaf mold for the life of me. We've put leaves in a pile underneath plastic and it stays dry leaves. It's wet, it stays dry leaves. I never get dirt. We put dry leaves down into the fields, and because of the late October winds that we get when the cold and the warm pressure squeezes, they all blow against the fence. They don't even live there. I tried doing it with my garlic one year, and about a week later it was gone. It was ridiculous. And then some people say you need to water it, so then you need irrigation. Anyway, my favorite idea is actually one by Will Bonsall, who's a veganic grower down in Maine. And his idea is that he takes all those dry leaves, but he shreds them. And by shredding them, the particles are finer. And even if it's windy, it doesn't pick them up like they do when they dry. And I think they also stay quite more wet when they're shredded. So this is a great idea. So you can run over them with a lawnmower. You can put them into a small shredder. You can rip them up by hands if you live in an apartment. That'd be quite funny, actually. Anyway, but there are ways to go ahead and shred them, but I really like this. I also really like using straw, especially like next time we're gonna talk about planting fall garlic, and I love using straw mulch on my fall garlic. Straw mulch is great. I think it helps protect. And okay, so in-bed composting, coming back to it, what's another important reason why we should be doing this? To protect the soil from runoff. By having the plant systems, the root systems stay in the ground, and by in-bed composting, this is what we're doing, as opposed to putting dry leaves, which will block the soil erosion, but if it rains pretty hard, it won't as much. The root systems are going to hold the soil together, so it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to hold your beds in place. If you have permanent, and I always recommend 100% permanent beds, and permanent paths, wherever you walk the same place, and then don't walk on your beds. All of those root systems will go ahead and even roll into, kind of snuggle into the pathways as well. It's just going to hold your soil better. So I hope I've made that point. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say. No, but also for in-bed composting, what it also does is it kind of takes away from this idea. Now, I'm a small farmer, so as a small farmer, we're trying to make some income from our rows. And if I were like some market growers, if as soon as a planting was finished, I would take it out, till it under, replant it, so I would have another cash crop. Well, not only are we missing out on the whole in-bed composting thing at the end of the season, but we're also, more than that, we're missing out on the late season flower heads that are so important to, like I saw tonight, just a couple of bumblebees left that were trying to get a meal in before it got cold, or the migrant sparrows and migrant finches that come through, or the resident finches that come through that will glean sunflower seeds. They will glean the last of the bachelor button seeds. This is very important. This is very, very important if we want to create a vibrant, biodiverse ecosystem in our garden. Again, it's not just about growing, and veganic growing is not just about growing food for humans. It's about growing food for all. All right, let's continue on. Okay. Oh, and yeah, so that brings up another thing too. Agronomists will also tell you that for something like the Colorado potato beetle, you should really take your potato plants out of the field, because they like to harbor under, and cucumber beetles, they say the same. You want to take all of your cucumber plants out, or all of your winter squash plants out, because cucumber beetles will stay in there, and then the next spring they'll proliferate. It doesn't matter whether you leave it there or not, they're always going to be there. They're always going to come back. Colorado potato beetles, you can live in a place that you've never farmed before. You can plant potatoes. It is guaranteed that in the first year, you're going to have at least one or two, probably more like 20. I don't know how this works, and I don't know how they figure it out. I mean, they must just be trillions upon trillions of Colorado potato beetles flying around North America during migration time, but they're there. So whether you take your plants out or not, it doesn't really matter. Now, we took our plants out this year because we wanted to have a nice bed that we could plant our buckwheat, and buckwheat's growing vibrantly. You can leave a little bit. You can leave them all. It really doesn't matter. The one thing I will say about Colorado potato beetles is, and one thing I have noticed, is that if you do have more potatoes in the ground, those potatoes are perennial, and they will resprout the next year. If you were to pull up that potato plant, you will notice that there's Colorado potato beetles in where the potato is. So they do like to have a first generation. So what's going to end up happening in most cases with Colorado potato beetle, again, is if you plant potatoes for the first time, it's not going to be the potato beetles that were living at your place, but it's going to be the next generation that shows up. If you have them at your place, if you have potatoes at your place, you're going to have the first generation, and then they're going to have babies in the second generation, and then you're going to get the migrating generation. Anyway, there you go. But still, you're going to have them anyway. And it doesn't, and what I noticed this year is we have less Colorado potato beetles this year than we ever had. And I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if it's because we don't spray and we let predators come in. I don't know if it just really wasn't just a bad year for them. I don't know. The point is that no matter what it is, no matter what issue it is, no matter how intense a website, which are always funny, a website is to tell you, and I have a question here from Paul that I will answer in just a minute. No matter what sort of end of the world Armageddon statements people are saying about this disease or this insect pressure, leave all your plants there. Don't believe it. Just don't believe it. Busting down myths. We love to do that on the show. Just don't believe it. It's going to be fine. Okay, Paul. Heyo, everyone. Wondering if you have tips for what to do with beds after digging up potatoes in the fall. Thanks for this, Jimmy. Yeah, actually, we had very potato little bit thought it was our interplanting of dill. Maybe it was. Hey, in Nova Scotia and Nunaki. Cool. Um, yeah, depending on if you have time, what I really like to do, and I don't know what you're planting in those beds next year, but I was just mentioning we put buckwheat. And we love putting buckwheat after potatoes. It seems to work really, really well. The beds are nice and loose. The buckwheat usually grows quite tall. So if you have time, plant buckwheat. But if you don't have buckwheat, plant oats. And if you don't have oats, plant peas. And if you don't have peas, plant clover. Really doesn't matter. Plant whatever you want. It really depends on what you plant the next year. If you're planting dry beans or bush beans or carrots, you don't really want to put clover. You don't need to put clover for the beans, and you don't want to put clover for the carrots. Buckwheat is a better option because everything seems to love following buckwheat. And maybe it was because of your dill. I hope so. I love interplanting ideas. It's funny how little scientific research is out there as to what works and what doesn't. But I think in all of our interplanting systems, we find things that work and we stick to it. Doesn't matter what the science says. There you go. And I think I mentioned this already, but no matter what I let in-bed compost or we let in-bed compost, it is absolutely always amazing how little is left in the springtime. So leave it all there. It's really going to do your gardens well. They're going to become so much more fertile by using these methods. We do bring in some vegetable-based compost. We do make our own compost. But really, the majority of our soil fertility is coming from this in-bed composting method. In just 6 years, our soil organic matter increased almost 39% from 5.2 to 7.2. And this is really, really testament to in-bed composting. So this is just such an easy way to build up those soils. And again, in the spring, no matter what it is, you can just take a rake, drag it across your garden beds, and you're going to have just all sorts of wonderful dried material, sort of freeze-dried material that you should use. You can put it right underneath all of your winter crops. You can also mulch your tomatoes in the summertime. Anyway, whatever you want to use it for, but it's all working and it's all available. So I hope I answered your question, Paul. All right, let me make a note on time. We're moving on. Okay, 2. So if there's any bare ground at all, like Paul's potato patch, it's a golden opportunity to plant a late season cover crop or a wintering crop. So this brings up a question from Daniel all the way from Huntsville, Alabama. What winter crops should I buy, use, why? Great answer. Now, Daniel, where he lives, he has a lot of clover, a lot of self-seeding annual clover. And so I said that was great. Annual clover is a wonderful, wonderful crop. There are 3 that I recommend, and it's pretty simple. Buckwheat. I love buckwheat because it sort of brings up phosphorus down deep and makes it available for the next year's crop. Phosphorus is an element that is difficult for some soils to hold. And so the more phosphorus that your plants have, the better their root systems are going to be in the spring. So it's wonderful. Plus, it is a fantastic flower for native pollinators of all kinds, but usually, because the flowers are nice and delicate, usually the small ones. Other amazing thing about buckwheat is that if you let it go to seed, because again, seed companies, they'll tell you, cut it down before it goes to seed, cut it down before you go to seed, get more benefit. Well, yeah, you'll get more green material, but it's the stems too. Stems are, because we use, as veganic growers, we should be all using ramial compost, ramial chip branch wood, which is thick lignin material that takes a long time to break down. Sure, the green matter, green, leafy, nice and full of water is really fast to break down. That's great. But we want those dry stems to break down slowly. It's just more food for a longer period of time for microorganisms. It's great. But those little flowers are wonderful for native pollinators. They're wonderful for native bees and wasps and moths and butterflies. We love buckwheat, and we just think it's beautiful. We love having buckwheat patches with our sunflowers behind them. It's just absolutely a gorgeous, gorgeous patch. Very, very beneficial for the soil, very, very beneficial for the following year's crops. Clover, since clover is a nitrogen fixing legume, it is really awesome for pretty much anything that is a heavy feeder. So if you want to plant that at the end of the season, or like we do here when you're planting your brassicas, go ahead and underseed it with clover. Then the clover will feed the brassica plants. But if you plant that at the end of the season too, that's going to make just an incredible root system and annual clover here, not perennial clover. If you plant perennial clover in your garden beds, you will lose them. You will lose your beds. The perennial clover will just become a really, really thick mat. You really are just going to have to take a pitchfork or a shovel and just take out the entire sod. It just doesn't work. So I'm talking annual clover here, and this is really an amazing, amazing crop. And it freezes late, so I think it can get down to about -5, -6 Celsius, almost 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And it'll hold the soil wonderfully in the spring. It creates a really awesome dried mulch that you can then put under your cucurbit family. And since it's a nitrogen fixing legume, it's wonderful to plant just before you plant your cucurbits, or just before you plant your solanaceae, or just before you plant even your greens. Whatever you think needs a little bit extra nitrogen. Your fast growing greens, they really love that nitrogen boost. Well, in the spring, that's exactly when you're going to get it. So that's another one of my favorites. And Daniel, the third one that I really like is oats. Oats is one of my favorite. It's a grass, and it creates a greenish pod at first. We take some of those green pods and we dry the green pods, and we put them in our nightly tea. It's really good for women's health. It's also, I believe, really good for prostate health. So it is a wonderful sort of herb / grass, the oat groat, but when it's green. The green straw, the green turns brown and creates just a wonderful straw that ends up creating a nice straw mulch. And right now, a lot of it, because we planted it early this year, because we wanted to get those green, because we ran out, we wanted to have those green groats. The brown straw has also created brown oats that you can then save and replant next year as saving your own seed. You can also do the same thing with buckwheat. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. They normally, the recommendation is to cut all the buckwheat down before it goes to seed. But sometimes we let it, and then what will happen in the spring is it'll volunteer. And we love volunteers. We have volunteers going all over the garden. And it's a wonderful volunteer because I guess it's also edible. You can eat buckwheat shoots. I've tried them. They're all right. You know, they're not my favorite, but if you like them, grow them for that. You can also save the buckwheat and then replant them yourself. So wherever you wish to plant them. So those three are my favorites: buckwheat, annual clover. I like crimson clover and berseem clover. Berseem will create more biomass. Crimson clover is better in shade areas, so it's really, really good for undersowing. So under the brassicas, we also put it under the sweet corn. But both of them are going to create an amazing amount of biomass for holding your soil. So those are three of my favorites. Let me see if there was more I wanted to say about that. Hold on, I'm making a note on time. No. Oh, yeah. And why I can't recommend something like winter rye or what's another one I'm thinking of? Alfalfa in beds that you want to plant the next year. Now, I love alfalfa, and I'm actually creating a perennial alfalfa field of about 125-foot rows, so 1,500 square feet of just alfalfa, because I think it makes the most amazing sort of green grass or green hay mulch for our beds in the summertime. And that's why I'm growing it. And we can even cut it down and put it in our compost, because alfalfa is just a wonderful crop. The other one I was thinking of is vetch. Vetch is also a legume like alfalfa, like clover, that fixes nitrogen, but it is very, very pervasive. So you'll grow vetch, and then next year, pretty much, if you're trying to grow anything, all you're going to get is vetch. And winter rye is the same. You know, the root systems are really, really deep. And unless you're talking a tractor system, which I don't advocate for, because talking about small scale growing here, or even if you have a rototiller, the root systems, they just mat. And in Arizona, I really kind of took myself out one year from doing that. We planted, the recommendation was plant winter rye and chickling vetch together. And oh boy, it was not good. So if you have a tractor system, to use it. If you don't, and if you're working everything by hand, the 3: buckwheat, clover, oats, and you can't go wrong. Good. Moving on. But there can also be winter edible crops. Now, this is a really great time. I haven't had a huge amount of success with it here, but as some cultures are starting to be done, and let's say you've pulled all your radishes out and you have this empty bed, or you pulled all your carrots out and you have this empty bed, and you have this opportunity to either plant a cover crop or another crop, well, plant mustard greens. Plant like baby kale. Plant any kind of fast-growing mustard green. Arugula doesn't do as well, but Siberian kale, or some sort of Asian green. These will come to leafy green in 21 days in the peak season. So we're talking spring and summer. It's going to take about a week longer in the fall, because as the light diminishes, everything grows a little bit slower. But even if you don't harvest it, mustard greens create an amazing canopy of in-bed composting. So it can be the dual benefit. And if you're lucky, if you get a really beautiful October, which we can have here, and we can actually have it grow quite well, and it's not too rainy, but just enough, then we can be eating mustard greens really late into mid-November, late November, right from the gardens. Very, very cool. But again, like I said, it's also, mustard greens are a really great cover crop. We let a lot of our mustard greens, a lot of those, even arugula, baby kale, all of that is just wintering over, and it's got those really thick root systems, and it holds really well, just like a cover crop will, just like any kind of in-bed composting. But that's what you can try. You can also do lettuces, but lettuces are a little bit longer to germinate. We have a lot better luck this time of year doing kales. Spinach is also a really good option, because in the spring, the spinach will regrow. However, spinach does not like wet after it is growing well. If it gets too wet, it's just going to turn yellow, like our patch did this year. It was growing beautifully. It germinated well. It was beautiful green. And then within about 2 weeks, we got, 100 millimeters of rain, and that kind of took out the spinach patch. But you can try it. If where you live, it notoriously does not get a lot of rain in October or November, plant spinach. You'll be really, really happy after it dies back. In the spring, some of the first things that you're going to have growing back is that spinach. And there's nothing like a good spinach smoothie. I like spinach, right? A little maple syrup in there with your banana, even some frozen mango. Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. I don't grow mango, but still, got to eat frozen mango every now and then. All right, so continuing on, putting the gardens to bed. What does this even mean? So we've already talked about letting all the plants compost in the bed, and replanting those cover crops so that they'll do the same. And when it freezes and when it snows, everything will just fall. But what we're talking about here is everything that went into the garden. So all of your staking materials. So let's say you were staking your peas, staking your tomatoes. You have little stake markers for marking your rows. Take all of that out. Take all of that out before the end of the season. Burn the stakes if you want. Reuse them if you want. If you have a small irrigation system, we do leave some of it in place, but by putting the gardens to bed, we do flush the lines. So we leave our irrigation lines in place. We'll open the valves and we'll let the water run out that are still in the hoses so they don't freeze and burst. All of this is getting to the most ultimate point, which is that we want to keep our spring nursery bills to a minimum. All plastics that you have out there, plastics that you would have on your caterpillar tunnels or on your small tunnels, fold those up, roll those up, either put them inside or put them outside on a pallet under a tarp, something like that. We have a lot of sandbags around. We use those to hold everything down. All your row covers and insect screens and metal hoops, take all of that out. I've tried to winter over the lettuce greens or even kale by putting metal hoops and row cover to try to be able to harvest in December when the snows are there and it's minus 20. And yeah, it's more of a pain than it's worth. I didn't think about this, but because we hold it down with sandbags, when it freezes too hard, you can't even pull the sandbags off. So in the end, none of that really works. If you want to try to grow winter in the winter time, I would recommend either using a cold frame, which is a wooden frame with kind of a window. You can use a recycled window. You can use, one time I made one with a recycled shower door. You can make a cold frame that's made out of wood and that metal door, and then that way then nothing freezes. You can even insulate it on the outside if you want to try to keep it a little warmer, or grow in a small or even big greenhouse. This is going to give you a better opportunity to get in those late winter crops, or even January or February, instead of trying to do row covers and screens outside. So take all that out. When you're putting your gardens to bed, these are the things that you want to think about. You want to take out everything. So really the only things that are left in your fields are plant organic material. So I think that makes sense. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about that. No, I think that about covers it. I think pretty much it's about as easy as it gets. Instead of all that work of taking out all the plants, putting them in the compost, hoping it composts, put it back into the gardens. No, do that work in the spring. This time of year, we're starting to get into the dark time of the year. If we're following the rhythms of the seasons, if we're following the rhythms of nature, then we're starting to get tired. We're starting to think about hibernating. We're starting to thinking about building fires and snuggling close to our better halves and reading as the night falls low, as the night delves deep, let's put it like that, and the colds come in. So no, we're not in the same spirit as we are in the spring. We're in the spirit to cook things that are warm and cook all those root vegetables that we've harvested that we're storing. But in the spring, we're vibrant, we're alive, we're running, we have all this energy because we're following the amount of light, we're following the amount of sun. Sorry, I just had a question come over. Margaret, I'll answer your question in just a minute. And so I would think that you're probably like that as well. That this time of year, you might be looking at your patch and you're saying, I got to clean that. And there's some weeds, that there's some native flora that's just really too big. And what am I going to do with that? Am I going to take it out? And no, don't. Just leave it. Just leave it. And it's not even being lazy. It's actually doing all that benefit that I've already talked about. And in the spring, when you have all that energy, you know what? Even if you take it all out, there's still going to be root systems. You're still going to have native flora that's going to want to outcompete the little seeds that you're trying to plant. It doesn't matter. It'll always be there. So just let it go. Just let it go. But take out all the, I mean, you can leave your wooden stakes in if you don't mind, but they're all going to rot. But take everything else out. It's going to make your nursery bills. And as we know, the prices of everything are just skyrocketing. And I don't foresee this to change anytime in the future. So the best thing that we can do is take care of our tools, take care of our materials. Now, this isn't about putting our gardens to bed, but if you have shovels, clean off your shovel, sharpen your tools. If you have a small sharpener, or find a sharpener, all of these things are going to just benefit you. I take all of my row covers, I roll them up nice and tight, and I put them all into those recycled potting mix bags, or peat moss bags, or I even have them in black garbage bags that someone gave me 7 years ago. I'm still using the same one. There's holes through them. The point is to get them out of the elements and put them into a place where you won't have to repurchase things over and over. So let me ask this. Do you ever use smudges to prevent frosting, prolonging the season? I would imagine if you're talking smudges, you're talking about building fires in your fields. Is that what you're talking about, Margaret? I think we're on a little bit of a delay, but if that's what you're talking about, send it over, and then I will answer that question, because I had that thought, but I'll answer that question. All right, so Margaret is coming out. I have some interesting news to talk about. So October 8th and 9th is the Montreal Vegan Festival. And I am just blessed and have been fortunate enough to have been invited to give a conference. So if you're in and around Montreal on the 9th of October, it's a Sunday, at 3:15 at the Palais de Congrès, I will be giving a conference. How cool is that? On veganic gardening, homesteading, and farming, as well as talking about the plant-based transition, envisioning a world where it is a 100% plant-based agricultural system that we're all living in. So that's what I'm going to be discussing. And there's going to be a question period, so you can come and ask your questions like you do here. So hopefully anybody out there can make it. October 9th, 3:15 in the afternoon, Palais de Congrès, Montreal. First time in 3 years the Montreal Vegan Festival is back in person after the years of the pandemic. Come and join us. Come spend the whole weekend if you can. It's always a really cool festival. It's pretty vibrant. It's a huge space, and there's a lot of other cool conferenciers as well. So back to your question, Margaret, smoky little fires. Yeah. Okay. So here's what I learned about that. So we were thinking about doing that. I actually went down 2 years ago. We were forecasted to have -2 like the first week in July. And it just wasn't, and this was just going to be awful. So I went and dug holes, and I was going to build fires, but then I started researching it. And what I found is that what happens is that because smoke rises and it's hot, what it can create is the actually adverse effect. It can create the cold to get sucked underneath and stay there, not being able to move because the heat is holding it down. So it actually could theoretically make it colder. That's what I learned about making smoky little fires. So better than that, better than dealing with all that, if you have specific crops that you're trying to prolong the season, get your row covers out. I've done this. Thankfully, I haven't had to do this year. We're going to be all harvested, I think, knock on wood, before we get the freeze. We haven't had our freeze yet. It might come today or tomorrow, but I don't think so. It seems a little bit too warm. So we will go ahead and put row covers over, say, our hot peppers that are outside, maybe our last of our melons, our dry beans if I haven't harvested them yet. Sometimes we will get a freeze the first couple of days in September, which we didn't get this year. But that's what I would use instead of smoky little fires. It's a lot more work. Well, I don't know. Building fires might be a lot of work too. But I use the row covers, and it has been very effective, because usually when that first frost comes in, we're talking like minus 0.5, -1. It usually doesn't. First one usually doesn't go down to -3, -4. And so the frost, it's only going to be early in the morning for a couple hours, and it's just going to hit that frost cover and it's just going to stop. You can even use an insect screen. I've actually seen this work really, really well before. You can use this too, and then the frost will hit the insect screen and just stop also. So that would be my recommendation instead of smoky little fires. But if you've tried it and it works, that's what it's all about. It's all about observation, experience, trial and error. If you've done things and it works for you, continue to do it. I haven't tried it. Was going to do it once, then decided against it. In the end, it froze, and maybe I should have tried it. Who knows? Continuing. So the next show is actually going to be in 3 weeks from today. We're taking a little vacation at the end of the season, so we won't be around for the normal time, which would be in 2 weeks. So it's going to be October 6th. So it's going to be a busy week. I'm going to have Veganic Growers Hour number 17. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. Veganic Growers Hour number 17, and then the Vegan Festival all in the same week. But the one in 3 weeks on October 6th, same time, same channel, is long-term preservation and storage. We're going to talk more about how to keep all of those winter crops good all the way until the next April or May. So your potatoes and your carrots and your rutabagas and all of those things. How do you do it? I'm going to throw it out there to y'all. If anybody has a really good, I have a really good situation here. I had a really good situation in Arizona, but if you have a really good way of storing your produce, and I'm talking about long-term, so your potatoes stored now, all the way still good until next May or June, send it to me. Post it here on this channel on YouTube, or send it to me on Facebook. I'd love to see it. I love this kind of stuff. If you put it in sand, if you bury it 50 feet under the ground, if you put it under your house in a metal container, it'd be great. I just want to know. And also your fall garlic planting. It's going to be time for us to prepare our beds. What's the best methods? Where to procure our garlic if you haven't already. Hopefully you saved your own garlic from this year. If you had good success, like Catherine, I know you had good luck. I hope you saved some of your seed. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So as always, I'm going to leave you on this note. Veganic growing, as I've said so many times, it's not just about growing food for humans, but for all beings. Well, I hope, what does Margaret say here? Hope Montreal's Veg Fest is as good as Winnipeg's was. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed Winnipeg, so maybe I'm going to make it over there sometime. And Catherine, I plant garlic religiously every fall, still have lots to plant. All right, good. Excellent. So when we're thinking about our gardens, always think about everyone who lives there, not just how we're going to feed ourselves. And in the end, we're really doing what we should be doing, being stewards to this heaven that us humans call Earth, and giving all beings a chance to thrive. So on that note, peace. Thank you as always for being with me, and I hope you have a lovely 3 weeks until we see each other again. So thank you and have a good night.